A little while ago, I had the pleasure of interviewing Gestalta. Gestalta's had a career in rope going back to 2007. She currently works as a rope performer, a teacher, and is the author of Shibari Suspensions. You can find out more about all these things in the description of the video. I never asked you, how did you get into rope in the first place?
It was in about 2007, and actually it was really kind of a random thing. I was doing a lot of just kind of photo modelling and life modelling, art class drawing type modelling as well. I guess there was a part of me that was sort of interested in BDSM, kink, something like that. I don't think I would have known the terminology for it necessarily at that age, but I was interested in it. But every time I came across a photo of it, it was something that had this very kind of artificial aesthetic. It would be like latex, this kind of like plasticky kind of look, or like this kind of metal, very like clunky chains, handcuffs, something like this. And I was just always really put off by how inorganic it looked somehow, even though there was a part of me that was kind of fascinated by it. And I think the first time I came across pictures of rope, it would have just been through looking more through art photography. It was probably Iraqi or somebody like this, or possibly even Segura, thinking about it. I'm really not sure. But I just remember seeing photos and just thinking wow, I mean there's something that's that seems genuinely kind of emotional. It's got very beautiful lines. It's got this very kind of way of kind of working with the body rather than having just some thing that constricts and locks the body into some unnatural kind of thing. I hadn't really thought about the feeling of it though. I think I was just purely looking at this visual thing and being quite transfixed by it. And then I think I also around about the same time I remember seeing these portraits that Sam Taylor Wood had done of herself, where she's hanging. I think she did it after having cancer or something, and she's got these photos of herself suspended. Do you want some water, by the way?
Yeah, please.
Okay, should we... Yes, they're both squished. They were in my bag. Okay.
A fun fact about those pictures you saw, the person who did the rigging for that was the first guy who ever taught me rope.
Okay. I've always wondered, because I remember looking up and seeing the name of that person in one of the articles about those pictures, and then Googling and not being able to find the person from the name that they had in the article.
Yeah, it was a guy who went by Master Rope Knot, or MRK, and he kind of pops up and does some stuff on the rope scene, and then goes away again, and pops up and goes away again, so he doesn't really keep a consistent internet presence.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did wonder, because... Oh, that's really cool to know though, actually, because I just wondered if he was just someone that really is a complete anomaly, because he really didn't have an internet presence at all the time that I looked for him. But oh, cool.
Yeah, it's very much one of those people where when he's looking for when he's in a mood for doing romance, he kind of comes up and then he goes away again.
Oh, cool. What's he like?
Nice. Yeah. From Essex, kind of quite loud, not what you'd expect from a rope person. Yeah, a typical rope person is very very loud, very outspoken.
Okay. Cool.
Kind of does a lot of I guess more sort of Western influenced type rope. So
it's interesting because when you look at the photos, even though the rope's been edited out and you can't see them, you can tell it's Western bondage.
Yeah.
It's really really odd. Yeah. But yeah, I think with those photos there was something about them. And honestly, I think that the fact that the rope had been edited out was one of the things that I liked so much about them, just because they have this like atmosphere to them somehow.
Yeah.
Of, you know, this kind of, this very like, something is like frozen in a state of like neither like rising nor falling. It's just like, and I think that for me it brought up a particular, like I'm not a particularly visual person, like, you know, obviously like when I see something I'm like, I have an opinion on whether I like it visually, but in terms of memory, I don't think I have a very strong visual memory, but I have a very strong physical memory. And I think I got this instant like physical feeling from those, which is something that I still have and that I still associate really strongly with rope. And I know that that probably won't make a huge amount of sense to a lot of people listening, but it's this very like, it sort of reminds me of, I don't know, like childhood. Like I think I used to spend a lot of time when I was a kid like on swings, and you'd get to that feeling where you'd reach like that perfect point where like the swing was kind of going on its own without too much effort from you, and you'd get this feeling of like weightlessness.
Yeah.
And I used to be able to, when I was a child, I used to be able to like close my eyes even when I was just sitting there and like recreate that feeling in my head by by just kind of concentrating somehow. And I get it just from looking at those pictures, and I associate it with rope. It's like a strange thing. But yeah, I saw them round about the same time as I saw all those other pictures, and so I basically just found a photographer who was doing rope, and ended up doing a photo shoot with him, and that's how I got into rope. That was a very tangential explanation of how I got into rope. But yeah.
Would you say that the thing that appealed to you about rope back then is still the thing that appeals to you about it now?
Yes and no. I think that my, I guess, understanding of rope has definitely evolved a lot. I think when I was first, or like the first few times I did rope, you know, in terms of particularly like suspensions, the first performances I did, of course, you get this huge, big, like, adrenaline, endorphin rush high thing, which, of course, doesn't really happen anymore after all of this time. You know, maybe like once a year, and actually, to be honest, never when I'm being tied, only when I'm tying. Like maybe like once a year or once every 2 years I'll just have some tying session where I get this like rush, but generally like no. I think that's something that only really happens when you're like super new. So I can't really say that that's the thing that appeals about it anymore. It's hard to say, because also I think I've realised that for me at least, the sort of rope that I tend to enjoy most now, or that I'm the most invested in thinking about, is not necessarily the stuff that looks the most impressive, of course. And so I think because I was attracted initially to photos, I couldn't really say that I'm interested in that anymore at all either. Photography doesn't really interest me, or at least rope photography doesn't interest me that much in general now. But I think the feeling that I was talking about, this like interesting like liminal sort of strange sort of feeling of heaviness and lightness, is something that has kind of endured as a thing. That's probably the one thing I can say that has actually endured, like as being like my constant interest in rope all of this time. So
is that a calming feeling for you?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think there is something that's very, I don't want to use the word meditative because it gets like thrown around so much without much consideration of what it really means. But it's definitely very, like it definitely has like a way of being able to pull me into a very particular, like, not even focused. It's so difficult to get the words without using meditative or because that's not quite what I mean. But yeah, there's definitely something calming, something that like pulls me into a particular headspace, which I would more associate with being something that's quite warm, something that's quite heavy, something that's quite, I guess, cocooned, enclosed somehow, like, yeah, in just this very, like, wrapped up safe space, maybe, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a good explanation, is it?
It's, I find it a good explanation, especially like contrasting it with how other people describe their experiences of rope. I find it really interesting that you focus on the almost like being a shape.
Yeah.
And the way you describe it almost feels yeah, how to put this in a nice way, like vaguely childlike, almost like that kind of innocence of enjoying your own body for the sake of your own body. But before we get this kind of the sexual urges, that how we enjoy our bodies before we get that side of ourselves.
Yeah, which is also, I think, something that for me definitely like has carried through quite a lot. And that's not to say that none of the rope I do is ever sexual, like it is sometimes. But that's very dependent on the person. Like it's not like rope has to be like, if I'm tying with someone that I have a sexual dynamic with anyway, of course the rope might be sexual, but I can tie anybody, and if I don't already have that chemistry with them, it's not going to magically come up just because we did rope.
Yeah.
So actually with most people that I would do rope with, I think that, you know, that energy probably isn't particularly there. But yeah, I think that there is, you know, definitely something that goes a little bit deeper, that's just into this space of like connecting somehow with the body. And I think, again, like bringing back to this feeling of like, yeah, I suppose when you put it like that, like this kind of like childlike feeling, but also I think a feeling when you're still at a point in your life where I think your relationship with your body and your surroundings is much less tainted in a way. Like I think as we grow up, particularly in, you know, countries like the UK, for example, there's so much emphasis put on, or at least certainly for me, there's so much emphasis put on like academic achievement and like, you know, being good at reading and writing and this and this and this, and I always felt like, or at least not always felt, but as an adult I've realised that I got it into my head growing up that physical things were somehow lesser than like mental things, you know. It's like, oh no, it's more important, even in terms of creativity. There was, certainly as I grew up, there was a lot more emphasis put on like learning music than dancing, for example. Like that was seen as like a higher form of this, and again, like everyone would be like, oh no, you know, you need to get a job where you're doing something very academic, very clever, and actually I don't think I'm necessarily that person. I think I was always someone that wanted to be quite in my body, but I think it quite got like knocked out of me a bit as I got older. And I think when I discovered rope, it was something that allowed me to go very quickly, very deeply into my body in a way that didn't require years of training. You know, it was like, as a rope model particularly, I think you can just be tied and suddenly be there and suddenly reconnect with something without having to, you know, go to a ballet lesson every week and try and get good and question, am I good enough to do this? You know, am I like talented enough? Am I this? Like, I think rope just lets you do it somehow. Yeah. So yeah, that for me was quite a big deal somehow. Yeah.
As you mentioned, sexual rope, like, why do you think there's so much debate as to whether rope is sexual or not?
Because people need to get a life. Like, no, sorry, that's like a bad answer.
I wouldn't say it's a bad.
Like, no. Okay, no.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. Let's put it that way.
Okay, no. I can't understand it. I don't know. I mean, I just think that people should do whatever they want for whatever reason they want, as long as they're not, as long as everybody's over 18 and, like, consented to it. I just don't understand why this debate even exists. I can see it, from the point of view that I think there are some people in certain parts of the rope community that are so desperate to make themselves presentable as, like, artists or whatever, that they will, throw sex workers under a bus, for example. It's like, oh, well, you're doing, like, bondage as a pro-dom, therefore, like, what you do is dirty, whereas we're doing it as an art, therefore what we do is, like, and it's the same debate as this kind of, like, are you, like, pole dancing for exercise or pole dancing in a strip club? You're doing the same thing, but somehow one group of people gets to think that they're superior.
Yeah.
And in that point of view, I can see why there is a very valid debate going on.
And also the counter of that, which is when people want to know that their sexual experiences are super valid, therefore maybe people push into it and say, no, rope is sexual because, like, my sexuality is valid. So I can kind of see it the other way, maybe. Yeah,
precisely. But I think it gets taken too far. Like, I think, I think that, like, yes, I think if you are going to do something like rope, even if you're doing it for totally non-sexual reasons, I think it is important that you are happy to validate people who are doing it for sexual reasons. But equally, coming back the other way, if you're someone who's doing it for sexual reasons, I think you have to be prepared to, accept and respect the fact that other people perhaps aren't, and that's not necessarily because they're trying to, infantilize rope, or they're trying to say that sex is bad or dirty. It's just some people just aren't into it, and that's okay. Like, so. But yeah, I think it's really tricky as well, because I think that I don't want to say anything that's too inflammatory here.
Well, but edit it out if it's too long.
Okay. But I think that recently I have noticed that there is, of course, this, like, huge thing that's been going around the rope community a lot, with, like, a particular groups of people who perhaps do more, I don't know, overtly BDSM, overtly SM, sadistic, masochistic, sexual forms of bondage, claiming that other groups of people in rope have, taken the sex and taken the eroticism out of rope in the way that they do it. And I can't help feeling that the thing that's, like, most problematic about it in a way is that, like, how do I put it? They have such a narrow viewpoint of what they consider to be sexual. And when you think about it, like, the people who are really making these claims have 98% of their models are young, female, thin, probably white or Asian. That's their group of what they consider to be sexual bodies in rope. And I think when they say that other people are taking the sexuality out of rope, what they mean is that they don't find those people attractive. Yeah. And I think that's not really the same debate, to be like, well, actually, no, maybe male bodies and queer bodies and, like, fat bodies and whatever other bodies that you might want to put in rope, like, maybe some people find those sexual, and if you don't, well, that's okay, but that doesn't mean that they've removed the sexuality from rope.
No.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think my bugbear is just, I'm perfectly happy to accept that rope can be sexual and done sexual rope, but usually we're talking, when this debate comes up, we're usually talking about a very limited scope of, like, what they find erotic. So it's usually specific clothing, like usually a dress, usually lingerie, usually, like, the the mindset of the model is usually encouraged to be just a slight tiny bit submissive.
Yeah.
But also, a little bit ashamed, but also a little bit turned on. It's just kind of like very limited emotional range, I find, that's considered acceptable.
Yeah. And that just seems odd. I mean, the thing is, I can see why that's attractive. It's not that I'm not attracted to this.
Yeah.
But it does get a bit samey. I don't know. I think it is a bit sad if that's the only thing that's in your scope of what you find attractive. I think you're definitely limiting yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
And also, if you're thinking that's the only way you can show up in a sexual way or in an erotic way, that's kind of when you're saying that's how the scene should be around me. I don't know how people realise how much they're limiting the expression of other people.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think, and I think that's really sad, actually. And I think, again, it's, I think, very easy for, people who are relatively established, at least in the rope scene, to kind of, know that there are different groups and that, actually different groups within the rope scene might express or have a broader view of sexuality or a narrower view of sexuality, and you can go where you kind of want if you can find that and that's accessible to you. But yeah, I think, for people who are just beginning rope or just starting off in the rope scene, I think it's a bit of a minefield, I think, because it's so prevalent. There's so much of it everywhere around, that I do worry that it is really limiting and really off-putting to anybody who doesn't fit that very kind of narrow body type, narrow way of expressing themselves, and yeah, ultimately I just think it limits the rope community. And I think, in a way we probably would have like a huge amount more of like very, very interesting people involved in it if we weren't, well, not maybe us, but but if in general it wasn't plugged so much in that direction. But yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it fair a fair comment to say that your rope style is quite eclectic?
I mean, the thing is, I think my rope style's changed a lot over the years, and it's definitely gone through phases. I mean, it's eclectic in the sense that I don't think there's any one particular thing that I follow. I'll just kind of like be like, oh, that looks nice, and just pull this and this and this and like mash it together as to what I'm interested in at any given time. But at the same time, I mean, if you're talking about just the way that I tie technically these days, I'd say it's more just very simple and quite minimal, or at least I think of it like that. I think that I went through a phase where I was kind of trying to pull as much technical information from as many different people as I want and like mash it all together into like one big thing and come up with all these complex transition sequences and this and this and this, and I've just stopped caring. And now, honestly, like when I tie myself in private, I kind of do some sort of partial suspension or side suspension quite slowly, and then I take it down again. That is like literally the rope that I do most of the time. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that's eclectic, but I think I've just got to a point where I just really appreciate taking a lot of time over something very simple and just enjoying the moment rather than like trying to be doing something like new and interesting and different all the time. So I don't know if did that answer your question in any way?
It wasn't really a question, it was more just like a general prompt, I guess.
Okay, cool. Yes.
I guess what I'm kind of curious about is you've obviously got a huge sandbox of potential techniques that you know and can do. Why do you come back to that simplicity?
I don't know, I guess because most of the time when I tie, I'm obviously like, I don't take photos of my own rope when I tie. I sometimes have someone else take photos, but not that often. So more often than not, I'm just at home. I know that there's not going to be like a visual record, it doesn't matter what it looks like. And I guess I just realised that from the perspective of the person in the rope, something that looks complex and impressive from the outside doesn't really feel very different from the inside, necessarily. And I think for me it's more about building up like an interesting flow or something. So I guess I still put quite a bit of thought into what I do when it comes to things like, okay, how can I avoid that awkward moment where I'm trying to get someone who's been sitting on the floor to stand up, but they're too heavy for me to lift, so I have to politely go, excuse me, could you stand up please? Like, it's like this kind of thing which just breaks the headspace, basically. So I think most of what I do now is just trying to come up with nice, interesting flows to avoid all those awkward moments so that I can just focus. But that means actually making things a lot simpler because there are so many things where as soon as it gets complicated, you need to like stop to explain, like, excuse me, could you just like move your hip very slightly and shift the weight onto your left ankle so that I can make this, transition or something. And like, yeah, that's great for a show, but I think when you're tying in private, I think it's just more interesting to be able to understand very simple mechanics within the human body enough that you can just let the person that you tie kind of just chill as much as possible within the rope and not have to feel like they struggle or keep something in their head or like feel like they have to do something to, obviously if they want to they can, but I don't know, is that kind of an answer?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I guess, and I guess also that's like kind of the other thing I think, because it all again comes from experience of being tied, and I realise I think I have quite a strong sense in my head from being tied of like what the boring moments are and what the interesting moments are, and then I'm sitting there being like, okay, how can I make the boring moments either take less time or put something more interesting into the boring moment, and like how can I make the interesting moments take more time and like play with the interesting moments. So actually simplicity means that more often than not it's just that you're like finding a way to like to change the amount of time that people spend in each of those moments, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Could you give an example of what you consider to be like a boring moment or times that are a bit of a drag when you're tying?
I mean, I'm somebody that likes as much as possible when I'm being tied to either have either motion and interaction or to just have heaviness. So any moment before the first suspension line is put on is just really boring for me, unless the person is like very, very focused on interacting somehow. So like there has to be, either like a lot of touch or a lot of like, I don't know, making me look at them or, moving me around or like finding some way to kind of like shift my body into different positions as they're tying. As soon as the first suspension line goes on, it's fine because then I can just be like, I'm in my own world now. But anything before then, it's like, I think you really have to like work a lot on kind of creating some kind of thing. And I guess because any complex tie, even if you're really, really, really good at tying, chances are if you're tying something that's too complex, you're not that focused on the person that you're tying. Like There's probably like a few people who could do it really well, but more often than not, like it just becomes so much about the rope and so little about the person. But yeah, I think that ceases to be interesting. So yeah, either I try, for example, if I'm doing a chest harness, I either try to make it so minimal that it's over in 2 minutes, and then we can just like get on with, you know, either some sort of like movement floor play, or we can, you know, move into the air or do partials or something. Or I try to look for something where the design has like interesting moments where I can interact, like maybe it's all tied from the front so that I can like stare at them while I'm doing it, or keep them engaged or something like that. But yeah, anything where you're just standing there like this, waiting for a TK to be tied while the person tying you is behind you and you can't see them and you can't interact, and you're just like, oh my god, is it over yet? Like this, this just, bores the crap out of me. So, that's one example. Also hip harnesses. Like, there's no interactive, connective way to tie a hip harness as far as I can tell. And if there is, like, I'd love to know. Like,
I really want it, like, from a, like, I'd like to get down with you go, but I really want to do one now just because I'd
just be kind of like, I've found the way. I mean,
take that, hips.
Okay, yeah. If you've got one, I would be totally interested to learn it.
I mean, maybe I'll try it on you and you can let me know.
Okay. Give you like marks out of 10.
Yeah, it's like thumbs up or thumbs down.
Yeah, exactly.
But I agree that it's almost like an issue that maybe like you can almost like switch your brain off from the person. I think sometimes when you're tying, and for me, a large part of learning to tie has been to introduce the technical elements whilst not losing the connective elements. And I think that can be tough, especially as you're overcoming hurdles, like, you know, you're just naming your first TK, or you're just getting into your first few suspensions. That feels like those are periods where that interaction almost like is at risk of being lost because of that. Yeah,
I think definitely. And I've seen it happen so often, like when I've been teaching and there's been like a workshop and there's maybe like, I don't know, maybe for example there's a student there who perhaps the workshop is a little bit above their level, but they want to try and keep up anyway.
Yeah.
And I've seen like people just have complete relationship breakdowns in the middle of a rope workshop because the rigger is like so focused on what they're doing that they've like forgotten to check in with the model, or just forgotten that the model's there, full stop, until it becomes like an absolute crisis. And I've had, and I've really just watched this happen from the outside so many times and being like, God, this is like awful, and I hope I was never like that. But to be honest, chances are it probably was. Like, right back when I was first doing it. Maybe not quite to the same extent, I think, because I've been modelling for a long time first, but there were definitely a few occasions I can think of where I was so focused on like learning something really hard that I just forgot to like check in and talk and be like, oh, are you okay with this? And yeah. And I think that that's maybe just a problem with the way that rope is taught now, if I'm honest. I think there's so much of this pipeline. And of course, for some people, like, it's fine, like you learn all the technical skills and then you get good at suspension and then you go backwards and put the connection in.
Yeah.
But some people never get to the point where they realise they have to go backwards and put the connection in. So maybe it is better to focus on a teaching style that puts less emphasis on learning this difficult stuff, but more emphasis on like, actually it doesn't matter if you don't know anything as long as you like mean it or something. Like, I don't know.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. I think it's really tough. I think it partly is because so many people feel like suspension is this pinnacle of I can do rope now. Or like not as many people view it as suspension whilst keeping a good connection with the person is I can do rope now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a real problem, actually. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. And at the end of the day, I think it might, in some cases, just come a little bit down to personality. Like, I think that particular, rope where you just want to tick technical skills off your list potentially just applies to a particular personality or a particular type of person. And you know what? If they're having fun and the people that they're tying are having fun, then, like, fine. It's, like, not the sort of rope that I'm interested in, but, like, maybe that's just...
Yeah.
That's just the thing that appeals to some people. I think the important thing is just to let people know that there are maybe options at the very least. If they find that they're a little bit bored of just standing there and being a body, then, like, maybe there are other things they can look at experimenting with a bit.
So I'm curious, because were you saying that you are not you weren't by nature drawn towards, like, more academic things?
I wasn't quite saying that, but finish the question and then I'll come back.
I'm kind of curious as to how the process of writing your book was.
So I wouldn't say that I'm, like, naturally am more drawn to academic things. I think I was more
drawn to. I meant to say more drawn towards physical things.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, like, the person that I am right now, in the phase of my life that I'm in at the moment, I cannot imagine how I did that book. Like, it just blows my mind that it got done. I feel like I've almost had, like, a total personality shift since then. And that person is dead, and now this is Gestalta version 7.0. It was, like, struggling to remember what Gestalta version 5 was doing, but
I remember bumping into you a few times around when you were writing it, and you seemed possessed. Like, you seemed like ridiculously focused. It was like you had a mission in life. And
yeah, I realise in hindsight that I was also possibly had was in, like, a very severe PTSD period, not because of the book, for other reasons. And I think that maybe the book had just become my thing to focus on to not be traumatized. So if I seemed possessed, that might be why. It's odd to think about it now, but I think, like, when I was writing it, I was just going through this phase where, like, every single thing in my life was so organised, and I could just hold vast amounts of information in my head, and, remember every single thing that was on every single page of this book, and just be able to, like, my taxes were done the day that we were first, 6th of April, there we go, taxes filed. It was really, like, and looking back, I think it was actually just my way of, like, attempting to control the absolute chaos that my life was at that point. So that's the answer, actually, as to how I wrote that book. Me now has chilled out and remembered that I'm actually a very scatty, chaotic, disorganised person with very severe ADHD who can't remember where I put my socks. So that's a problem. But yeah, I mean, it did well for the time that I was writing it, I guess. My God, did I really seem possessed?
I mean, you just, like... when you were, like, you were always, like, polite and nice and stuff whenever I saw you, but, like, it was like you were driven to do that, to finish that thing. Like, it was...
Towards the end,
it was kind of impressive. See, like, do you ever get jealous when you see people who have a thing, they know that they need to do it, and, like, everything else is fine, but they've got to get that thing done? That's just what you seem like.
Yeah. I mean, one of the symptoms of ADHD is also hyperfocus. But I don't think that ADHD hyperfocus is enough to explain that book in hindsight. Like, it almost killed me. Towards the end, I was basically living on a diet of black coffee and red wine, like next to each other in cups. It was just like, this will make me relax and this will keep me awake, and this will make me relax and this will keep me awake. And it was just, yeah. But yeah, it was a bit of a process, because I think I realised that obviously, like, I had a relatively limited amount of time in which I could do it, and I had basically no budget at all, like, so I was so focused on it that I wasn't really able to do that much other work to earn money, and I was getting little bits of money in from the publisher, but it was kind of just enough to maybe cover like half of my living costs if I was very frugal, kind of thing. It wasn't like much. So I guess I needed to finish without killing myself, and I like not finishing just wasn't an option. God knows.
Are you proud of it?
It's interesting. I'm a pretty harsh self-critic a lot of the time, and there are lots and lots of things about it I would really like to improve. Quite a lot. But I think I'm at the very least able to rationalise with myself that actually, if I'd have just had more support and more money, those things would have sorted themselves out. Like, things like just like layouts and stuff. Like, I taught myself how to use InDesign and was compiling the layout of the book as I was writing it, which is insane. Like, nobody writes books like that, apparently. I didn't know this at the time, but apparently that's not how books are normally written. And so I feel like, if I'd have had the budget to have a designer working with me, like, all of the problems with that would have just instantly fixed themselves, for example. So at least I'm aware that most of the glaring faults with it are not necessarily my problem. But yeah, I think that it was nice to kind of like prove to myself that I could take a project that big and actually like take it to completion without dying. So that was nice. Yeah.
And in my opinion, I think it's really good.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And I've had kind of conversations with you about this before where I've been like, I think the first time me and you ever interacted, like, you did a performance, and it was pretty much flawless. Like, I was mesmerised.
What was the performance?
Soapbox, when Kazami came over.
Oh, yeah. Oh, cool.
And like, you were organising it, but you're also performing in it, which is quite a lot of shit to do at any one particular time. And the performance you did with Sophia, like, I was mesmerised, like, in terms of, like, it was both obviously technically really good, but the way you guys just stayed in the pocket and connected the whole time with all these people looking at you. I mean, you may have been like, maybe your experience of it was different, but I was blown away, to be honest with you, because I think I'm a lot more into having performed myself. I know how hard it is to stay focused when you're doing it, because there's just so much happening at the same time. So I was blown away, I'll be honest with you. But then I said to you afterwards that was really good, and you were like,
Yeah, I'm a really harsh critic, honestly. But I mean, I think the performances I was doing around that time, like, looking back, they probably were like technically like the most like on point ones I've ever done. And partly that was just because I was working with Sophia a lot, and as a model she's just incredible, like really just a really amazing person to work with, and someone who I think was, at least at that time, we were just both equally dedicated to like wanting to work on like making these things really good. So it was really developed like in tandem with her. And I think that performatively it is very difficult to find somebody that it's, you know, that like easy. Well, not to say it was always easy. It wasn't like it like, oh, we just did it, like it was a breeze. But like, you know, to find somebody where you like communicate quite well and you're able to like want to kind of like put the you know, put the effort into trying to like create something together and develop something together that's quite, but I do have this terrible tendency to just always hate everything I do anyway, so like, but looking back, I actually think they were quite good, but it's just me at the time.
I really hope they're recorded somewhere, because like, damn, they're really good. Like, I still think about them now, and like that was going back some years now. And
thank you.
So like, in context, like before that book came out, there wasn't really an awful lot of book-based tutorials around suspension, and I don't think there was even that much online videos of how to suspend.
Mm-mm.
Were you like, did that create any kind of tentativeness in you around doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't my idea to write a rope book on suspension. It was the publisher's idea. And honestly, I think the reason that the book is the way it is was that I was so nervous about it. I wasn't prepared to put out a book that explained anything to do with suspension unless I tried to explain everything first. Like everything that you needed before that first. I don't think I explained everything. I think there's still bits that could be in there that aren't. But then of course you get to this end thing where it's basically there's like 4 suspensions at the end, having, you know, after like 110 pages or whatever of explanation, it's just like, now do a side suspension, which is like 1 page, and it's. But I think that's the. But maybe that is in some ways like actually the experience of doing rope for suspension. And yes, I was really tentative. I'm still, if I'm honest, like not totally convinced that learning rope from books and videos is a particularly good idea. I don't think it's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Like, I think that obviously, like, I would rather that there is some information out there than no information and people just like try to reverse engineer a photo and kill themselves.
Yeah.
I feel like in an ideal world you wouldn't have the book as like your primary learning source. I feel like, you know, in an ideal world at the very least you need like, you know, a peer group at least. Even if you live in an area where you don't have like somebody who teaches, at the very least you need people to like bounce off of, and like maybe you're all reading the book together or all watching a video together, and like between you can figure it out or something. But yeah, I'm not so yeah, I guess I'm, from that point of view, I'm tentative, but then
at the risk of stating the obvious, could you say why? Like, as in, like, what tends to not translate well in a book or a video format that might translate in other formats?
Just the fact that I think when you are doing suspension, like however, like for the first times you do suspension, like, okay, maybe if you've got like a sort of flawless memory that can read an entire book and just remember everything in the book, like, sure, but actually, like, most people don't have this brain. You know, most people are going to go and attempt their first suspension and they're going to just be stuck in this moment of being stressed and not notice something obvious, that it takes a pair of eyes from the outside to stand back and be just kind of like, is that really locked properly, or something?
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. Like, I think no amount of reading a book can like really stop that from happening in a moment of stress.
Yeah.
That's all really. I think that for some people, like, possibly like a book is a really good way of having the information there to like revise and to refresh. And I know that for me personally, like, if I have a book, I learn not necessarily just for rope, but just in general. If I've got a book on the subject, I learn 10 times faster than if I like have to listen to a lecture, or if I have to like, you know, have an app or something like this to try and teach me something. So, like, yes, there is definitely, I think, for some people's brains an argument for that, but I still don't think that that necessarily translates it into your muscle memory.
I agree.
Yeah. but I think in the end, I like any fears I had about it was kind of taken away just because I really don't want rope education to be exclusive, and I think that most people can afford like €25 or whatever my book is, £20 something, I can't remember what it is. Most people can afford this as a one-off purchase. Not everybody can afford to book a teacher to teach them something.
Yeah.
And some people just live in an area where there is no real life teacher, even if they do have the money. So,
and some people might be able to have a lesson with a teacher, but then need some additional support afterwards, and the book provides the additional support and context.
Yeah, that's true. And I think like all of those like little things which, you know, like I always feel really weird, like if somebody who's a complete beginner comes to me for a private lesson so that I can teach them a single column tie, and I'm just sitting there like, you do not need to pay me this much money to learn. I mean, you're gonna pay me this much money because you're here now and it's my time, but also like you don't, you know, I would much rather that people who are total beginners just learn that off a video, or like at least in like a group workshop where it's relatively like cheap and they get like the interaction of being able to, because I think, you know, at a beginner rope workshop it's just as much about meeting other beginners as it is about like actually, you know, doing the thing. But when somebody comes for a private lesson to learn a single column tie, I'm just like, you're really wasting your time and your money here. And to be honest, like, I'd much rather they have this from a book or a video or something, and then when they've got that information, then they can come and be like, okay, I've learned these things, and now can you offer advice to improve it? Like, yes, that does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know if I agree.
No?
Yeah, so like, if you think, I've had people come to me for like their first private and they've already, okay, maybe I disagree, I'm not sure. So I've had people come to me for like a first private and they've like learned from a book or video or whatever, and like maybe it's there, but they go about it in such an inefficient way that it is frustrating to them and the person they're tying, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they're going around the body, but they're not like handling the rope, it's just going around them. And they're forming knots in a way which is like kind of hurting the model because it's making the cuff lock down, but it's still there. And so it's been kind of divorced from the end point, and the steps have been divorced from like the process of tying. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm very specifically talking about doing a beginner workshop in a private context. Like, I think that the best thing if you're a beginner is to find a group class.
Yeah.
Where you've got a room full of people who don't know what they're doing, and you can all look at each other, and you can all be like, oh, this person did this, and you can like talk to each other, and also you can get to know people so that you don't feel like you're like, oh, I'm just trying to learn to tie my own ankle. Like, maybe you can make friends or find people to practice with. But yeah, I guess, I don't know, I guess it's just been that my experience that with like probably 80% of the total beginners who I've ever had for private lessons, they actually seem to learn less fast in a one-on-one context than they do in like a group. And that even if what they've got is some kind of bad, or not bad, but like quite rudimentary information. So let's say that they've read a book, they understand the principle behind a single column tie, but they're just applying it wrong. It's still quicker for me to like correct that mistake than it is to like sit there and spend 2 hours being like, no, like that, no, like this, and somehow. I think that would maybe be my logic.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I get that. Yeah.
But I do agree with you in many cases. Like, I think one of the things that the pandemic has really, like, made really obvious is that there are so many people over the last 2 years that have been sitting at home learning stuff with videos on the internet, and now finally they're like coming to rope events for the very first time, and you can see, oh yes, this person's learnt that tie, this person's learnt that tie, this person's learnt that tie, and it is completely divorced from anything that you would actually want rope to be. And I'm just looking at it like, oh no, this is gonna so yeah, no, I do agree with you in that point of view. I think there are definitely limits. Well, God, we've really tangented here, and I feel like I might have had a point, but I might have.
Yeah. Sorry, it's my fault.
No, it's mine as well, because my brain tangents a lot.
But I agree with you in the sense of like, I'm disagreeing with myself, my previous point, in that I think sometimes having even just like incomplete information, because learning rope is a pain in the ass in a lot of respects, and it's not it's not, as we were talking about before, it's not a one and done thing. Like it takes time to like cement these things. Sometimes just having like an incomplete grasp of something like a harness or a single column tie at least gives you something to work with when people come to you.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe the reason that we're both sitting here disagreeing with ourselves is that actually it just depends on the person. Like most things in life, it's like, you know, sometimes you get a student who's like, who just seems to be able to learn out of books, and you're like, good for you, mate. And sometimes you get someone who like absolutely just cannot, and you're just like, okay, maybe this person needs a lot of hand holding.
Yeah, maybe everyone's different.
Maybe we're all unique individuals and there is no one size fits all rule. And God,
That can't be the answer. No. Sure. There must be one right way of doing things.
The one true way of the rope. Yes. You know, there is not. There really isn't. But yeah, no, from that point of view, I'm glad the book exists, because I'm sure that there are some people for whom it is possibly the best way of learning. And there are many other people for whom it is the worst way of learning, and hopefully those people sort themselves out into the right group. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice having so much information out there and different ways of accessing it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's like, I think it's made like a huge difference in terms of rope. And I suppose it is like an interesting thing, because I always try to take myself back to trying to remember what it was like to be a total beginner, and to be honest, it's not something I can totally relate with, because I was just somebody who like bottomed and self-tied for so long before I started tying other people that actually by the time I started tying other people I just learned in 5 minutes, because I'd seen it, I'd been around it for years. And so basically like my actual learning process was like getting a private lesson to be like, can you confirm that the frictions on the back of this TK are correct? And then I was like, yes. And I was like, cool, I now know how to tie. Like it was, and because I'd been around it for so long, that really was my process. And of course, you start to practice, you still have to improve, but I never went through that phase of everything feeling like, why is this so hard? But I still try and put myself like back into that mindset, and of course like when I started doing this there really wasn't that information. There was like Midori's book, perhaps. Was Midori's book even out? No, I think Midori's book was out.
It's had its 20-year last year it had its 20th year anniversary.
So there was Midori's book, there was the Two Naughty Boys book, and possibly The Beauty of Kimbaku, I think. There wasn't really any particularly widely available video stuff out there, and people were basically just like making it up from what few books there were. And, you know, looking back, it was awful. Like, everything was always just perpetually tied 500 times too tight, and we just thought that that was how it was meant to be done. And you know, I just remember the amount of times that I'd have like completely throbbing purple hands from how tight everything was, and just being like, this must just be what rope is, and these like awful rope marks, and just feeling like my body was always just like not quite in the, like, I was always having to hold my weight in really strange ways. I was never able to just like fall into a tie, and it was awkward and clunky, but somehow we figured it out from that. And I do think that actually the lack of information in some ways gave people a lot of creativity somehow. You know, it gave a lot of diversity in terms of the way different people tie. And I remember like the first time that they started like really trying to do international rope things, where they'd be like, oh, let's get people from different countries and put them in one room to do rope and see what happens. And they were so fascinating, because you could literally get 10 people in a room who tied in 10 completely different ways. And one thing that I do worry about a bit now is that rope has boiled down to there basically being like 2 ways that people tie. Well, maybe not just 2, but you know, it's like more often than not now I seem to be finding myself going to rope events, and there's like, this person's learnt from that lot of people. This person's learnt in that way. And seeing that real diversity and that real creativity, I do worry that is going to get a little bit lost somehow. I don't know if my concerns are really well-founded or not, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just like an old person being like, in my day, it wasn't like this. It was, but I hope I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Like, when you started, was there as much emphasis on like schools? So like, you'd have like schools dedicated to certain rigger styles?
I was unaware that these things existed for years, until like, I think I had probably been, to be honest, part of it was I just wasn't that interested. Like, I was interested in doing rope, but I didn't really give a shit who was doing rope. I was just kind of like, you know, interested in it because I was interested in, and it just hadn't occurred to me that there could be like, you know, famous riggers. It took me years. I think maybe it was about probably a good 3 or 4 years before it really hit home that some people within the rope scene are like more well known than others, and that there's a hierarchy. That's not to say that didn't exist before. I think it was just my lack of interest in researching these things.
Yeah.
And when did I first figure out that there were schools? Like, I mean, maybe round about the same time, but I don't think I ever... It still took me another year or 2 before I realised that that was like a big deal somehow. I was like, I started to notice round about that time that people had different styles, but it didn't really occur to me that there was much of a dogma around that time. Like, that took a little bit longer to really sink in. Yeah, and yeah.
I remember when I was learning from you in private, like, you seemed very encouraging as far as like, not pushing me, but like encouraging me towards like maybe doing performance or maybe doing a bit of teaching. Do you like have any strong thoughts about like almost like mentoring like people in that regard? Do you have particularly strong feelings on who should or shouldn't be teaching, or will there be more teachers, less teachers?
How to blow up the rope scene? I mean, I think this is an impossible thing to say, because obviously there's no qualification for becoming a rope teacher. And if there was, I don't know who I would trust to hand out that qualification, if I'm honest. Like, so yeah, in some ways, I guess we don't really have at this moment much of a choice than to have the rope scene be like totally unpoliced in terms of who's teaching. And I know that, you know, there have been attempts to kind of come up with some school or some kind of system, but they always seem to have so many internal problems within that system that I think that the qualifications that they give are basically meaningless. And so I think that like, obviously, sometimes I come across someone who's advertising themselves as a teacher and I'm just like, this person should not be allowed to teach rope, but who am I to say? Like, it's not like a, you know, it's not like I can really do anything about that, and nor should I be able to. Like, I don't think I should be given that power, and neither should anybody else, really. Like, I don't think that's I guess you just have to hope that these things like sort themselves out, and somehow by process of reputation things sort of become clear. Yeah, and it is so so difficult, I think. That's a really hard question. I can't imagine what it would be like to mentor somebody to become a teacher. I think that seems like that would be very difficult. Sorry, this might be a lot of umming because it's a really, really interesting question. I just haven't ever really given it that much thought, so I'm trying to like think through it as we're sitting here. Like, I guess that really it's always just going to come down to finding somebody whose style speaks to you as a person. Really. And, you know, for some people I can understand why they like perhaps need the security of feeling like, oh, I did level 1, level 2, level 3, I got a certificate, I'm safe now. It's meaningless, but if that makes you feel better, then cool. It's I don't think that having a piece of paper can actually like make you good at doing rope at all. It might make you slightly less likely to kill someone, but that's about all. And even then, only slightly less likely, because you can never really account for every variable. And that's such an interesting question.
I mean, when did you feel like, I can teach class now?
Honestly?
Yeah.
I started teaching really, like when I first started taking teaching seriously, it was really just because I had been like the model / co-teacher for so many people. And I was quite frustrated at being in this position where it was very clear that like they were the person and I was like secondary to that, whilst simultaneously realizing more and more that I knew more than they did. Like I kind of got to the point where I just realized like no, like I actually do think that I've got a better idea how to do rope than half of the people who were tying me, and I also think I possibly have a better idea how to explain how to do rope than half the people who are tying me. And that's, I think, it's still the process of then learning to teach is actually very hard, and I think that I'd been teaching for quite a long time before I really got into a point where I was like, oh no, I really feel like I found like a groove of like what I'm good at teaching and like how I teach. But yeah, like honestly, it was just like at the time I probably would have just described it as like general frustration at the patriarchy. Like it was just being just perpetually pissed off by being talked over by some like cis white dude who didn't know shit. That's all. Like sorry. It's like yeah, so that's why I started teaching. And yeah.
With that in mind, do you have... now you're on shoes on the opposite foot, do you have like really strong feelings about who you teach with, like in terms of who bombs for you?
Who bombs me? Like at the moment, I'm mostly either teaching beginner classes or I don't have a model at all. I just ask for volunteers from the group to like model for exercises. Or I'm teaching with people who are like, you know, close personal friends / partners.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily because, like, you know, in some cases these people don't really have any interest in becoming like a professional rope model. They're just, sometimes they have input to give to the class, and sometimes they're just like, I just kind of want to sit here and play on my phone when you're not tying me, and I'm like, okay. But yeah, that's kind of where I am at the moment. I would love to find some dynamic where I'm really, you know, having like a person that I tie with regularly, where we're really developing content together, like, and like planning the workshop together and kind of, you know, but at the moment, I guess pandemic and everything, it's just not really been practical, and I don't think it's really been in line with the way that I'm tying privately at the moment either, somehow. So no. But I do always pay them. I do have strong opinions on this. Like, if I'm getting paid, then the person I tie gets paid. So that's I do have that strong opinion, yes. Yeah. Even if they are somebody who just wants to stand there and not really say much and just kind of, you know, that's fine. I still consider it to be work, so there's that. Yeah.
Do you feel that because you bond for so long that you kind of, you're providing like enough of the bonding information to fill that?
I guess sometimes. I try to make a point of asking for like feedback, like so that the model, like I have tied with certain riggers who will not let me talk when I am tied up, like at all. Even if we're teaching a class and a student asks a question, he'll just be like, oh, you can't ask them a question until they're untied. Like, that's happened to me. Wow. So I make a real point of trying to remember to be like, do you have anything to add? Is there anything you want to say? Like, to make sure that people know that it's okay for the model to give feedback and, you know, to what's happening. But some of the people I tie are just very much like, yeah, I feel fine. And that's all the feedback they want to give. Some people are the people who just like naturally want to be like giving a lot of feedback. They want to be like explaining stuff to a class. They want to be active in the teaching. And some people just kind of want to be tied up, and speaking to a group is not really their thing. And but because I'm tying with people at the moment, like, I'm only really most of the time inviting people to teach if I have like a personal relationship or friendship with them anyway. I'm not going to be like, you must give more feedback. So that seems just as wrong as shutting someone up, to be honest, I think.
Two things. If you like what we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Because what we do is a little bit naughty, a lot of our revenue ends up getting blocked. So this is the best way to keep the channel going. Second thing, if you want to take another deep dive into someone's kinky lifestyle, check out this video about revealing them more. I think you'll like it.